kind of teary that you would build me up so much. Not any pressure on me or anything, but you'll receive a care package from me. How does that sound?
Anything, just a wave is good.
Well,
thank you, sir.
Number one, I just want to thank the panelists that's mentioned, that's working with me on this. And I just want to let everybody know that just beyond state police, there's always the opportunity to serve the public, and I'll do that as long as God willing, and it puts a breath in me. But on July 1st of this year, Serco North America signed a contract with the Louisiana Department of Transportation and Development to not only man, but manage the traffic management centers under the ITS department, the Highway Department. So not only does Serco have the Safety Service Patrol, but they also have the TMC as well. And I think that works hand in hand when you have both of those sections working together, and they already know each other and they talk to each other. So it's going to help us collect a lot of data. So the first thing that we did whenever we moved in is I wanted to see where we were as far as our training status goes, because what happens more than likely than not is that people in government have a tendency to move from section to section, and we lose some of that historical perspective. So we wanted to take a look and see just where we stood as far as inventory. Next slide. So the areas that I want to kind of highlight in this brief presentation is that I had some historical knowledge about where the TIM program originated from before we received the national model in 2012. So a lot of kudos actually went to the Senate Transportation Committee with the Louisiana legislature, which governed how police officers are receiving the training. And that first step was to have a course requirement for the certification of police officers. They attend traffic incident management in order to get their post certificate. And then that was in 2007, 2008, and then 2009 was when they put that law in place. And then you had the Federal Highway Train the Trainer courses that were introduced in 2013 and 2014, which put our first instructors on the road to putting the training out. And then these other options we're going to talk about is the training rosters and reporting, and our revitalization and restructuring efforts, and what are our outreach efforts. So the next slide. So when I looked at the numbers that Kate sends out and started delving into the Excel spreadsheet, not so much the graphics, I kept seeing that we kind of flatlined in a couple of areas. And knowing in 2008, we were approached by Senator Joe McPherson of the Senate Transportation Committee, and he reached out to the lieutenant colonel over the patrol section of state police, which at that time was Ralph Mitchell. And Ralph got in touch with me at the academy, wanted us to produce some material to go out to all the police officers in the state that could be issued in a roll call training methodology. So at the academy, we put together a 38-minute video that was mass produced by the video section and also proved, and we sent that to every police agency in the state. Then at the same time, on the back end, Senator Joe McPherson had a law passed stating in January 1st, 2009, every police officer had to be certified in traffic incident management. So where this actual research kind of came into being is if Senator McPherson had not entered that into law, we would have had a tough time going back and trying to recapture numbers. So we reached out to 28 post-certified academies after July 1st to try and figure out where their instructors were. Of those that responded, we found that most of those instructors didn't even reside within their own agency for whichever academy. For example, East Baton Rouge Parish does their training through CARTA. Some of their instructors handle that in other parts of the state. You have people that come from state police and actually teach the course. So knowing that at least 2 people per troop within the troops and state police had instructors, then that kind of gives us a starting point. So the second wave was to reach out to LCLE, and my hat's off to Mr. Paul there, who actually was able to go back and query the system and tell us how many police officers were actually certified by the state. So we knew that if we ran those numbers of certification, that would bring up our numbers that showed pretty much that they had flatlined. So the second reach out was to the Fire and Emergency Training Academy. One of the instructors there, TK Duvall, who I taught with for many years, and Mr. Ken Fowler, who's the Assistant Director of Training. And they were able to query their files and show that some of their records didn't match what was coming up, I think, with what Kate had received, via the SharePoint. And then we had a new Department of Health Director of EMS Services, Ms. Susan, who is a great asset. I'm going to be speaking to her a lot more to see if anybody had any instructor training records, because there were some people in the EMS world that we certified as instructors, but we didn't find any training rosters on that. Next slide. So this is the slide taken straight from Ms. Katie's file, just to show that pretty much we had flatlined when going back and looking over the years, that we would only have small incremental, anywhere from 150 to maybe 200 people per year in the top 2 law enforcement, fire and rescue services being trained. And I knew that simply wasn't the case. Towing and recovery, we stayed pretty much even in those areas with 1 to 2 or more per year. And then the other disciplines, such as people with parish government, those are flatlined as well. So I knew that top figure, and I knew the fire and rescue were going to be slightly underreported. Next slide. So what we did, and if you hit the next slide a couple of times, it's going to have some red letters pop up so we can show what our numbers actually were. 16,632 police officers were certified since 2014. So that's a big difference. And knowing that it's more than that, because January 1, 2009, we actually started training police officers. So we had a lot more than 6,632, but we needed a starting point. So we used 2014 because that was when we had the first 2 instructor classes. And it was important because those first 2 instructor classes were actually going out and teaching people that were police officers, fire and rescue, tow and recovery at that time. So we knew that over those period of instructing, that the new people coming in to the law enforcement or fire and rescue, they were going to catch that training, but we needed to push training out to the people that were already certified. And over time, it's been since 2009, it's well over 12 years since we've actually started. We knew there was going to phase out because people like myself were retiring. So everybody coming into the sector was going to be exposed to it. So we broke down exactly how many fire departments there were in the state, 550 plus. And when you break those down further, 323 of those departments are volunteer, 178 were combination, which means they have at least 1 paid firefighter there, and the rest are volunteers. Then you have 50 that are career. So just to give you some example, I sent a survey out just to see if I could get a response. And right as of today, I haven't received less than 10%. But right now, they're about 65% of their membership need training, and about 133, which is about 35%, have the training. 254 need the training. So it tells me that we still need to work in the fire department side of the house. And then the other contact was to the 72 ambulance companies that are certified in the state. So I reached out to 3 of the largest employers, which would be Acadian Ambulance, Acadian EMS, Baton Rouge EMS, and New Orleans EMS. And we've recently pushed the 4-hour web-based training just to give them some knowledge of what to expect. What we still want to grow in that area, we still want to push out. So just those 3 areas alone, it drove our numbers way up, but we know there's still more work to do. So that kind of helps us to drive what our next step is. Next slide. So what we're doing right now is we're reviewing the current train the trainer instructor roster. And you'll have to excuse me, Paul, I left out the W in FHWA again, so you can hit me with a wet noodle. We're going to look and see just how many of those, and I think there are over 300 that have either retired or been transferred out, or they haven't had any teachings. And we're going to find out who our core people are, and we're going to place them in a position where they can teach more, and then solicit the active instructors to see who would be a good fit. We're going to recreate our regional instructor network. Instead of having, for example, 100 to 200 instructors out there simply doing what their job is push out the best practices. If we have a regional instructor, he can kind of, or she can kind of look at that and see where our numbers are going, where's our need. And that way they can report back that, hey, we had 6 or 7 classes this week. They all got placed into SharePoint, which is what our ultimate goal is. We want to make sure that people are submitting the training into the SharePoint. And we're going to probably get with the ITS, with the contract manager, with ITS, with Mr. Ryan, and see how he wants to create a database of scanned rosters, just so that we can fall back on having those. And then we're going to progress even more in 2023 by creating temp teams. Once we've pushed out the fact that there's more need for traffic incident management classes, we're going to start building temp teams within the 8 regions, the planning and development regions of the state. And just by the top of the head, I know it's Baton Rouge, New Orleans, North Shore, Lafayette, Lake Charles, Alexandria, Shreveport, and Monroe, because those are highly metro areas. Next slide. And they also coincide with those 8 planning and development districts, everywhere from New Orleans up to Monroe. So that's kind of a great way for us to do outreach, because we're going to be attending every single one of those safety coalition meetings within those 8 planning and developmental districts, because that's the outreach we need. Next slide. So when we're forming these temp teams, we want to make sure that we're asking the local planning commission members, the people that are in those planning districts, to come sit in on those. The highway department in those respective areas, which districts, the parish and city officials, and private sector transportation businesses, because those are people that utilize that highway all the time. And then we're going to make sure that they're being conducted quarterly. They're going to be addressing after action reviews for major incidents, infrastructure, construction areas struck by, and near misses. And we're going to try and see if we can't come up with some way to see if we can build a database, a reportable database, whether it be forms through Microsoft or anything, to see just where we have the near misses, because I don't believe that we're actually capturing those. Because I know in my 29 years, I've had at least 4 near misses where you've been hit by a hubcap or something to that effect. So that'll tell us just exactly where our hot spots are, because if law enforcement and first responders, EMS workers, if all these people are not getting hit, the next best thing to know is where the near miss is occurring, and see if we can do an after action report and see how we can make those better. Next. So when we're generating the outreach and we're generating the interest, we're going to attack those areas and sit with those agencies that are within the areas that we have the safety service patrol. And those pretty much mirror almost the 8 planning districts. We have a heavy patrol in the Baton Rouge metro area, the New Orleans and North Shore area, Lake Charles, Alexandria, and Shreveport. And we're going to make sure that everybody along that route, whether they be the PD or the sheriff's office or public works, any of those people we're going to sit down and talk to, and we're going to tell them what the traffic management center really does. And we'll actually invite them to come on site to see what the operators in that TMC. And those TMC operators, God bless them, because they have a tough enough job as it is, and they're constantly moving eyeballs and entering information. And I'm just extremely proud of the work that they do. The secondary outreach, we're going to expand out of the safety service patrol routes that are in design, and we're going to talk to those agencies and partners that provide arterial support, which would be the U.S. and major state highways that feed into those interstate routes. Next slide. So some of the assessment practicum that we're going to be talking about is what stakeholders are going to be participating in each TIM, in each reason. Are there regular meetings taking place? If not, how can we press that? Make sure that we're inviting guest speakers presenting. It doesn't have to be just law enforcement. It could also be local public officials that help fund infrastructure, which is a big plus, because if we get them involved in this, it just makes the crash responders' life a whole lot better, knowing that there's some top-down support. And then if we're performing these meetings, we have to make sure to incorporate what our TMC monthly and quarterly reports performance indicators are. And it's the basic 3 performance that we've always talked about since day one. You know, the roadway clearance time, incident clearance time, or their secondary events that need to be captured. And if there is no TMC within that regional planning area, then how will the data be collected? Well, I can tell you right now that LSU does an excellent job in their crash data research team in providing or a statewide with a breakout. Where I noticed when I looked yesterday at their website, it showed statewide that the average time to clear a lane is about 41 minutes, which is not too bad. But that's taking the low end and the high end and giving us an average. But we want to see breakouts for each region, how we can do to make that better. Next slide. So biannual reviews that we want to start meeting is we want to know how many teams we're forming, how many disciplines are involved, is each team developing a needs assessment, and have the stakeholders themselves participate in Sharp 2 training. If not, then that's a perfect opportunity for us to sit down and give those classes as well. And everything that we do with building these teams, we're going to make sure to use the Federal Highway Administration self-assessment tool. And that's a new field for Louisiana because we have pretty much an ad hoc meeting. I know that I've held several after action meetings in the Troop L area where I was from in my home troop for interstate closures longer than 2.5 to 3 hours. So it's very important that we're doing these and we're referring to that TIM assessment tool to make ourselves better. Next slide. And some of the future initiatives, we're going to be working with professionals to encourage them to include annual and biannual refresher training, because once you put someone through the training once, that training evolves over time. So since Louisiana started from a simple 38-minute DVD to in version 3 of Sharp, just because they went through it with a 38-minute DVD trainer, it's evolved. So how are we catching people every time we make an evolution? And the only way to ask for that is to make sure they're including some sort of TIM training in a refresher setting. We want to make sure that we push the fact that almost needs to be mandated, because right now it's seen as an elective for in-service, which means they're going to reach out and grab something else. Maybe that's something that can be approached on the legislative side of the house. What are the probabilities of making the 4-hour web course a part of in-service? Is some other discussion points. If we can take the best information and push it out, and that's what people in departments are looking for, is how they can train their departments better and quicker without giving them that extra time if they're shorthanded. Maybe that possibility of doing a 4-hour in-service or web-based would be a great idea. And then we're going to target other people that need training. For example, the parish government, the OEP offices, DPW offices. And then we're going to reach out to the 911 centers. And also towing and recovery, because I can tell you kudos to Jonas Martin, who's now a captain with the state police. Jonas took some initiative in the Troop A area in Baton Rouge and had some mandatory training for towing and recovery professionals, which I think is an outstanding job. But we need to push that out in other areas of the state. And then the next gen initiatives are coming up next. So Louisiana is kind of, I want to say slightly behind on pushing next gen, but we are pretty good with making sure that the information is being taught to first responders, but we still have room to grow. Next slide. And if y'all have any questions at all, this is going to be my contact information. Just please copy it, whatever you need to do. If you have any questions at all, I'll be following in the chat room. And being that I'm no longer a police officer, I don't have all the answers anymore. So other than that, I appreciate the time and thank you for being attentive. Thank you, Jim.